The complication and the gap, I think, is actually understanding how do we adjust our lifestyle to make sure that we create the biggest possibility for an elite result to happen, whilst actually kind of letting go of the result. Because if you're holding on to this result too closely and you kind of go, that's it, what happens, and I see this in corporate teams all the time in projects, is that the outcome result that they're trying to create is the thing that becomes the input to the process.
Yeah.
Even if you think of budgets and stuff like that, you create these budgets and then the budget becomes the only input, as opposed to stepping back and going, what's the process that we've really got to follow rigorously to make sure that we create the best possibility for the outcome to happen. So we've got to learn to let go of the outcome at the same way as kind of holding on to it tightly. So it's this kind of Zen, it's almost this Buddhist Zen kind of state of holding on tightly with an open palm is, I think it's super important. And that's where I think part of my challenge and part of what I love to do is to maybe try and re-educate people around what elite performance actually is. Because to me, I think people can lead a better life just by adjusting their approach. Even if the results that they get, they don't try and focus on getting results. It's almost like the weight loss concept, isn't it? Is if you try and lose weight, the chances are you probably won't, because you're so focused on that as opposed to what's the individual things that we need to do to make sure that we create the possibility that that can happen whilst believing that it's just going to happen.
So hi and welcome back to The Peaks Life. I'm Lynn Fernie and with Mike Warren as usual, and today very excited to be joined by our special guest, Jeremy Watkins. Jeremy, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Cool. So I think let's dive straight in because we know lots about your journey, but our listeners and the people watching don't. So give us a bit of a potted history of Jeremy and how you got to where you are right now.
Wow, crikey, that's a big question. So let's do a really, let's do a pre-seed version, I reckon, of what that's about. Otherwise, it might take a little bit too long. So I'm actually from Jersey in the Channel Islands. I emigrated out to Australia about 16 years ago now. So being in Jersey, I used to work in finance. I'm actually an accountant, but don't tell anybody about that. It's one of the things I try not to talk about these days, but that's okay. And for any of the listeners who are accountants, I love you. And my wife's an accountant, so let's not worry about that. So I'll try and take my foot out of my mouth as soon as I've said that. But so when I actually moved to WA, I used to run big projects in the UK, and the natural progression of moving out to Australia. At the time, it was the big resources industry boom, and I got, I guess, unintentionally pulled into major corporates to run big major capital projects, and straight back from the high stress environment that I worked in Jersey and the Channel Islands doing financial system integration with live money. We left Jersey because what I now realise, and this is part of an interesting journey, is I actually realised that I burnt myself out. But at that point in time, and this is like 16 years ago now, what actually happened is I was actually diagnosed with really severe rheumatoid arthritis. And was told by a consultant or a specialist over in Jersey that I would be in a wheelchair in 2 years if I didn't do something about it, and ended up on this huge concoction of drugs on a daily basis that I would have to take, some of which were anti-cancer drugs, a drug called meloxicam, which, me being young and naive at the time, I just took an expert's advice and kind of went, oh, well, that must be true. I don't know anything different. I feel rubbish. So it's got to be that. So we decided to have a shift in lifestyle and move to Australia. But the interesting part of the story, and where this gets super interesting, is that I, as part of the application process, and I hope there's no immigration people listening, but as part of the process, you obviously have to go through a medical. And the immigration expert doctor basically said to me, if I'd have written down what I was taking, that I would have just been rejected because of medical conditions and previous medical conditions coming into Australia. So I kind of said to him, well, what happens if I just stop taking all the drugs then? And he goes, well, then I don't have to write it down on the form because you're not actively taking it right now. So that's what I did. And interestingly, from that moment, I found my health getting better. And I found my energy levels getting better. And then the shift of lifestyle from the UK, which, if I'm being completely honest and a bit vulnerable about this, I was living a horribly unhealthy lifestyle and drinking way too much, eating a whole bunch of rubbish, working 16-hour days. That's why I've got grey hair. And coming to Australia, I just made a decision to actually shift what that was kind of all about. But then came over to Oz and kind of got pulled back into that corporate existence, back into the high stress environments, which is fine, because I know it's about how we deal with it is the thing that's important. But I hadn't really educated myself enough about what my own self-leadership journey was all about, and therefore what my kind of personal leadership journey was really about. And I think, long story short, that resulted again in me having another burnout phase. And this was actually quite recent, interestingly. So this was only about 2.5 or 3 years ago for me now. So this is back when I was actually running my own business and had started running my own coaching business. So I guess here's the irony of our expertise, isn't it? Is that I'm the leadership and performance expert, and I burnt myself out. So it's a classic irony. Which is what's really taken me now to do exactly what I do now, which is all around vitality and focusing on working with executives and teams and bigger organizations about making sure they prioritize vitality in how they go about leading their lives so that they can be the best performers that they can actually be. So it's been a really big shift, but over quite a long period of time.
Jeremy,
so I think
let me dive in, because there's so much in there that we're desperate to get into, and I know that people will identify with. I want to kind of I want to hold on to the vitality, and I'd like you to talk some more about that. But before we do, I think your journey is fascinating, and so many people go through these challenges, but many people are not prepared to make themselves vulnerable. They're not prepared to talk about it. And so we do a lot of talking about this sort of thing, to make people see that they're not alone, that it's very, very common. And interestingly enough, almost every person that we've had on the podcast, every guest has had some kind of major health challenge, has reinvented their life because they've been through these sort of crises. And you said that you changed not only your lifestyle, but you changed country, you changed your lifestyle, you got out of corporate life, you set up your own company, but then there was still another trap waiting for you, which was you were driving your own business and you almost sort of had a relapse. So can you just tell us a bit more about what happened there? So, you were in control. So how did it happen again to you?
Well, so here's the thing that I talk to a lot of my mentoring clients about, is that I don't think many people really deeply understand how deep their personal strategies actually run in terms of how you approach certain things and how you go about doing maybe the work you do, or how you go about doing the life that you lead. I think is so much to do because of a very, very, very deeply ingrained pattern of behaviors and a deeply ingrained pattern of thinking. And therefore, and it's not a small but just a shift from corporate to running your own practice, or a shift from an environmental shift, i.e. a location, isn't actually sufficient to actually drive your thought patterns. So therefore your lifestyle approach. So the interesting thing that I talk about a lot is that although my practice is focused around elite performance, What I think happens when we say that to people is what they think is we're talking about generating elite results, not taking an elite approach to how we actually go about leading our lives. So to me, an elite approach is actually being very, very focused and very intentional, at the same time as making sure that there's priority given to retraining ourselves and relearning things and reflecting. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, is enabling and allowing enough time for rest and recovery, of what I actually call renewal. So even if you go to a muscular perspective, you kind of talk about your muscles don't actually build when you're doing the work, your muscles build when they're repairing. So actually, if you don't rest, you can work out as much as you want, but if you don't have enough recovery time, then you're just straight back into square one. So it's actually about breaking all of this down to understand, one, how do you lead your life? And are you truly aligned with the way that you're leading your life? And secondly, how do you then make sure that you then put that same approach to how you lead others? So a lot of it is about being super, super, super intentional. And in a way, it's kind of interesting. In a way, an elite approach or an elite athlete sounds super glamorous, doesn't it? I think a lot of people have this kind of glamorous image that you're this elite performer, but when you break it down, it's actually kind of boring. And it's actually really quite structured. And it's actually being really clear about where you're going and what you're doing, and then making sure that every decision that you make is in line with those things. Because if it's not, you create this beautiful performance image of what life's going to kind of be like, but you don't back that up with the behaviors that are actually required to enable that to happen. So I think lots of challenges of lots of execs, and I work with entrepreneurs and things like that as well. And I think it's the outcome that they want, which is to be an elite performer. The complication and the gap, I think, is actually understanding how do we adjust our lifestyle to make sure that we create the biggest possibility for an elite result to happen, whilst actually kind of letting go of the result. Because if you're holding on to this result too closely and you kind of go, that's it, what happens, and I see this in corporate teams all the time in projects, is that the outcome result that they're trying to create is the thing that becomes the input to the process. Even if you think of budgets and stuff like that, you create these budgets and then the budget becomes the only input, as opposed to stepping back and going, what's the process that we've really got to follow rigorously to make sure that we create the best possibility for the outcome to happen? So we've got to learn to let go of the outcome at the same way as kind of holding on to it tightly. So it's this kind of Zen, it's almost this Buddhist Zen kind of state of holding on tightly with an open palm is, I think it's super important. And that's where I think part of my challenge and part of what I love to do is to maybe try and re-educate people around what elite performance actually is. Because to me, I think people can lead a better life just by adjusting their approach. Even if the results that they get, they don't try and focus on getting results. It's almost like the weight loss concept, isn't it? Is if you try and lose weight, the chances are you probably won't, because you're so focused on that, as opposed to what's the individual things that we need to do to make sure that we create the possibility that that can happen, whilst believing that it's just going to happen.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. You know, taking that structured approach, having the process step by step through the process and following it, and forgetting a bit about the outcomes and the results, and letting them happen naturally. I want to come back to that concept of vitality, Jeremy. So you use the word vitality. Just tell us a bit more about what vitality means to you and how you're using that in your business and with your clients right now.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll send down to you, Lynn, separately, is that with all my mentoring clients, and actually I take teams through this as well, whether they like it or not, and it's I use a very simplistic tool called the Vitality Tracker, which is something that I designed, I think, because when I burnt out for the second time, I kind of went, oh, this is just ridiculous. What's this really all about? So it was fortunate that when I realized that that was the case, my wife and my family, my 2 kids, we actually went on a 3-month trip around Australia, which was coincided with the time that we were away. So I was afforded the opportunity, I think. So I see me burning out a second time. You know, you mentioned the fact that you can have like a really bad event that makes you as the catalyst for something else. And for me, it actually was I actually now look at it as completely the opposite, as I'm sure most of the people that you work with are, is that when you have an event that causes a trigger that makes you make the changes, you now look back on it and go, that's actually the best thing that could have possibly happened to me. Even though it was unpleasant at the time, it's what I've learned through that process is so important. So I kind of, I mean, I've got a lot of qualifications in neuro-linguistic programming and a whole bunch of coaching quals and all this kind of stuff that I guess it's just the background to what I do. But neuroscience is the thing that really, really interests me, and how we can go around retraining our brain and also retraining our body. So I bring the body into that whole thing, which kind of led me to the point of physical, mental, and emotional balance is the thing that's fundamental to actually creating what I call sustainable performance. So a lot of what we're looking for, I think what a lot of people are looking for is elite performance outcomes, but what we're actually looking for is a sustainable level of high performance. And I realized that that wasn't where I was. Now, interestingly, physically, I was actually fine. Because I'm a reasonably fit kind of guy. I'm reasonably sensible with how I approach diet and how I approach my lifestyle. But it was the mental and emotional element for me that was the bit that was out of balance. So what I physically did whilst I was away on our 3-month trip is I started tracking on a daily basis 5 times during the day where I was physically, mentally, and emotionally, just to score from 1 to 10. Just based on my own sense, not really against any metrics or any design, because we know within ourselves whether we're a 1 or whether we're a 10. We just do. And we all have our own inner genius that knows that. And Mike, your 10 out of 10 will probably be very different physically from my 10 out of 10 right at the moment. So I started tracking this vitality piece. And as soon as I started tracking it, it gave me so much information, so much knowledge, and so much data to start to go, hold on, this is the thing that caused the triggers that go into a mental problem or emotional problem. And this then brought up all of the barriers and brought a lot of the unconscious barriers to the surface, which is brilliant. And also confronting at the same time, because it starts to make you realize where those barriers actually are. And as soon as you know that, the beautiful thing that you're faced with is you now have choice, because the unconscious has become the conscious. So now you have to make an active decision to actually do something about it or not.
Right.
And I think that is... to me, that's, you know, we spoke before this about fear and vulnerability and whether people talk about these kind of things or don't. And it's almost like, I think, if I were to be very, very stereotypical, and I don't mean to be, it's not what I believe, but if we were to take a traditional male stereotypical approach to a lot of health and well-being style of activities, is it's very easy to brush it under the carpet and kind of pretend it's not there, and only go to the doctor when you're sick, and not look at things from a proactive perspective, but look at things from a reactive perspective. So this balance in terms of what I've termed vitality of physical, mental, and emotional, and for some also underneath the basis of that is the spiritual element, has really become the underpinnings of how I now live my life. And I still do my vitality tracker on a daily basis. It's just a habit. It's a routine. It takes me 20 seconds a day. You just blast it through. But it gives you that forced opportunity to reflect on a daily basis, because it's the small little changes are the things that add up, rather than I think these big lifestyle shifts, when people hear a lifestyle shift, they think of big significant change as opposed to small incremental change and small incremental improvements. So they get scared, so therefore the barrier comes up and you don't do anything about it. So so that vitality piece to me is so fundamental, I reckon.
So I think the vitality piece, it's fascinating. The tracking tool, the documentation, the process you're using is fascinating. Go back one step, because we have a lot of the people maybe tuning in when they're ready to change their life, when they're ready to take on a wellness journey or improve their vitality. The next steps, the process you're using is sound and it will lead them through their journey. What's your recommendation to those out there who are currently trying to juggle their lifestyle goals, their professional goals, their career goals? They haven't quite got to that switch where they haven't got the prioritization right, where they're still focusing on their professional career and they're not ready to make the switch. What are some of the techniques or some of the ways that you flicks people across to say, right, now is the time, before the breakdown, before my life goes into a spiral, I need to take some action?
Yeah. I think that there's a key question that I ask people when I'm first talking to them is, do you truly have clarity about what it is that you're looking to achieve? Right. Do you really truly have clarity about what you want your life to be like? Do you truly have clarity about what's important to you? And, you know, we can talk in terms of values and vision, and also an identity piece. So it's not so much who you are, but it's who you're becoming that's super important. So I approach it from this. I very much don't approach it from an angle of kind of work and life and trying to create this this mythical balance. Because I think, and I think when you try and do that, I think we really set ourselves up to fail. Because in reality, the things don't always weigh the same, and they don't weigh the same at the same time. So to create this kind of tipping scale point like this, it's just a nightmare, and can lead people quite quickly to a place of almost self-doubt and self-judgment of going, I don't think I've got it right, and I feel bad that I'm not spending enough time with my family. But I also have all these things that I need to achieve in work, and therefore you kind of get in a bit of a stuck position. And so I think the trick to doing that is to actually not even really allow that into your psyche. It's more to go, how do you want to live life? So I separate things down into this way, into two areas. So I use one of my tools is it's called the Wheel of Better Life. It's not like a life coaching wheel. It's very different, but it's about are you clear about the things that are really important to you, which you and I know is, you know, this is the values that sit behind what's it. But not just do you know what they are. The question is, are you actually actively making decisions to bring those about on a daily basis? Do you really have clarity as to the vision of what it is that you're looking to achieve for you? What's your life vision? And are you dedicating your time and your energy to working towards that? And are you becoming clear about the identity that you want to create for yourself within yourself? And then you can keep going around the wheel, and there's 6 elements and stuff like that. But those are the key entry points. And it's fascinating, I think, the amount of people that when they first start looking at this type of work, which is what people call it self-development work. I call it serious development for leaders is how I like to approach it. Yeah. Because it's quite serious stuff. And it can be life-changing when you actually make the decision to embrace the concept of it, whilst not beating yourself up at the same time, because shit happens, and we don't always get stuff right. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes every day, and but it's how we deal with what we've done is what's the important part. And building conscious awareness of these things, I think, is the fundamental key to giving you some data to understand where you really are. And I think without the data, you've got no catalyst and you've got no benchmark for yourself. So what you then do is you compare yourself by accident or intentionally, and it's the biggest mistake you can do. You can compare yourself to someone else.
And I think there's so many things in there that we could dig really deep into. But for example, the fact that people do try and achieve this mythical balance. So if there's a point of balance, if balance is, for example, saying, well, I'm going to spend 50% of my time at work and 50% of my time with my family, but you're a project manager, so your workload goes up and down with the project, then you'll never achieve that point, purely because you can't control the environment around you. You can't control that workflow that's constantly shifting. And if you've set yourself out to achieve this single point, then that's like perfection. But because you'll never achieve it, you're constantly beating yourself up every single day, rather than saying, well, every day is different. How am I approaching it? What are the choices that I'm making today? As you say, what are the conscious choices? Everything is a choice. Everything is a decision. So how do I approach those decisions? How do I make them very conscious? And then how do I build the things into my life that I want to make myself the person that I want to be and to achieve the things that are actually really important? And I think that's very different to the traditional frameworks that people have been exposed to in the past. And those traditional frameworks, they put immense pressure on us, whereas that as you said, it just takes the pressure off, right?
I love it when this is quite funny. So when I'm mentoring people, and you can ask the typical coaching questions if you follow traditional coaching models, and kind of how at the end of sessions you're supposed to hold people accountable to things and achievement of goals, and that's all important stuff and things like that. But there is never once in one of my coaching sessions that you get to an end and go, right, so what is it that you're actually going to do? That's just a natural part of the conversation, because you're making commitments when you're actually doing it. So there's absolutely no need. If I think you've got the right relationship with the right coach or the right mentor, they shouldn't even have to ask you those questions. Because if they do, you haven't set up the process the correct way in the first place. So, and I don't want to go against the ICF and stuff like that, but it's but they're beautiful ways of starting to open essentially your conscious awareness. But as you rightly say, Lynn, everything we do comes down to actual conscious and unconscious decisions and habits and rituals. It's really as simplistic as that. And I love the whole idea of, I don't know if you've read James Clear's Atomic Habits book. So he talks about the marginal gains theory and the 1% change. So even that, I reckon, is too much. Like, I'm part of one of my projects that I'm going to be working on, I think, and I say that without any conviction right at the moment, but I think we can go much deeper and much further with that. Is that I think it's actually about a 0.01% change is what we should actually be aiming for over the course of 12 months. Because if we think behavioral scientists and neuroscientists are saying that we make up to 35,000 close to conscious decisions every day, when you break that down to 0.01%, you're still making 35 different choices a day. And then you kind of add that up, and that's massive.
That's a lot.
So when you do some basic maths behind a lot of the theories, you can really break it down to how can you make sure that you adopt that principle on a daily basis without, getting into analysis paralysis and all that kind of stuff. But we need to build up new habits so that we don't have to think about that consciously, because otherwise it's just in the too hard box. Our brains get overloaded with all the things we're supposed to do. So rather than just habitualize it and it's not a question, we just do it. That's what makes things way, way, way easier. But before you get to that point, you so have to understand, I think, where you're going and gaining clarity about the decisions that you're willing to actually make the commitments to engage with. This is why I love your 20-day keto challenge that I'm doing at the moment, because it's actually opening the doors to people to go, here's a choice. You can do it either keto way, you can do it a clean living way. Doesn't really matter. It's completely up to you. Just make the commitment that you're going to just do it for 20 days, because it's only 20 days. It's not that hard. But what you can create in 20 days is phenomenal. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And that, you know, that is the perfect segue, because I was about to say, when we talk about creating new habits and also getting to the point where we can do things intuitively, you've just started with us on the 20-day challenge, and you've started keto.
Yeah.
And so I'm fascinated, Jeremy, to hear what led you to the point where you thought, I want to now try keto, because you've done a lot of endurance sports, you know, you've done a lot of long riding, you've done ultra races recently. So love to hear a bit about that. And then why go for keto? What was it that inspired you?
Well, the honest answer to that, Lynn, was you. From the fact that you approached me and asked me to do it, and I went, oh yeah, cool, that's awesome, that's a great idea. But there's a cool thing out of a cool learning for me, I think, out of the recent ultra that I did. So it was just me and a mate. It wasn't part of a race. It was just something that we kind of wanted to do. So it was 70 Ks that we did on the Cape to Cape track in Western Australia. So for those people who don't know that Cape to Cape track, the majority of the bit that I run, which was the northern end of it, most of it's about that deep in sand. So it's quite a long way. And coincidentally, the day that we actually did it, it was actually 40 degrees down in Margaret River as well. And there's not a huge amount of shade.
And and for the listeners and people tuning in, that's 40 degrees Celsius.
No, there you go. So the funny part about that, even though that may sound super brutal to many people, but it was over like a 12-hour period, so we didn't rush, and we did walk quite a bit because lots of it was up dunes and stuff like that. And running the whole thing in terms of the footing and stuff, it's not possible. But anyone who's done ultras, quite a lot of it will actually end up being walking, because of making sure you're balanced and making sure you don't have an accident or literally just twist your ankle on something stupid and things like that. So you've got to be sensible as to how you approach it. But what happened on that day is that I bonked out of energy twice.
Wow.
And because it was so hot, both Dave and I actually ran out of water twice. We ran out of fluids twice on the route as well. So even though we were super sensible about, we had our wives kind of meeting us at certain stop points. And it wasn't that long a distance. It's only 15 Ks between each stop point. But because it was so hot, we were getting through like 3.5 litres of water between each section. And there was one point where my legs just went to complete jelly. And I kind of just said to Dave, hey, I've just completely, but I know my body, I knew it was coming. And I just completely crashed out of energy. So the only thing that I could do was to smash carbs to try and get stuff back into me at that point. And I think that was, now you ask the question, what prompted me? I think that might have been an unconscious thing for me to go, wouldn't it be interesting to explore how I could have had my body operate in a slightly different way, hence the keto thing. Now you've asked that question, you see. I've even learned something today out of this whole process.
Beautiful. And it is really interesting, because I think once you have made the switch from being dependent on glucose and therefore the glycogen that you can store in your body, which, as you found, is actually quite minimal. Hence, when we're out doing these long distance events, whether it's running or riding or whatever it is, we're constantly having to eat and we're constantly having to refuel. Whereas once you've made the switch and you go to, a keto lifestyle where you're basically fueled by dietary fat or your own body fat, when you end up in the same situation, your body is able to tap into its fat stores. And even the leanest person around, even down at 7% body fat, that's still a good few kilograms of fat, and it's going to keep you going for a long time.
Yeah.
compared to glucose, which is what we know about, the ancestral tribes, how they continued for days on end without, any kind of food source. So I think once you've experienced that, and you're running, not only the fact you're running on your own body fat, but you're running on this pure, incredibly clean source of fuel.
Yeah.
So your body starts to clean itself up. And it's, it really, once you've achieved that, the fat adaptation phase, and you've got to that point where, you are running on your own fat, or you're fasting, or you're eating fat, it makes such an amazing difference, not just in your body, not just in your physical performance, but your brain, your mental performance, even your emotional side. The hormones become balanced as well. So the central nervous system can function efficiently and effectively. And there's a really interesting parallel, I think, between, the physical side and, and the sort of the physical athletics that we would talk about, and perhaps performance in the workplace. So I know that, that's a connection you're quite interested in.
Yeah.
Where do you see that fitting in terms of leadership and elite performers, and how keto might actually help them with what they're doing?
So I think I think a really great way to, even if we were to be brutally honest with the best of intentions, is that I think I'm trying to do this politically correct, maybe I should stop doing that. So maybe if we just say the Western world, I think I think the risk that we have is that there's what I call an overperformance expectation. I think that actually drives a lot of how we think, or how we've been taught, or how we currently understand that we need to approach performance to create the results that we perceive we need to create in the workplace. And that in itself starts to create these emotional triggers and these mental triggers. I think when we can get to a point where we recognize that vitality, and even in my head right now, I'm now linking my model in terms of physical, mental, and emotional through to keto, and how that can actually help create this balance. What that sets us up for is a high level of physical, mental, and emotional endurance. So there's a lot of talk, and I think you get a lot of phrases in terms of buzzwords that go around, and there's a big focus at the moment on mental health, and rightly so. The concern that I have is that the approach to mental health is that it's actually something that we need to fix and something we need to address, as opposed to something that we need to proactively work. How do we get to be the best that we can be? So that we don't have a problem to solve, we have an opportunity to create. And I think a lot of this is like a mindset shift to go, we shouldn't always be looking to solve problems. In James Clear's book, in Atomic Habits, he talks about how we should be looking for better problems that we can find, not how we should look to solve the problems that we have. He kind of goes, no, that's the whole wrong way around. We should find better problems to approach. So taking a proactive approach to how do you look after health and well-being or vitality and boost your endurance. Resilience, I think, is another key buzzword that is going around the speaker circuit, especially that I work in. But it's dealt with in isolation in terms of how do we create resilience. And therefore, there's a whole seminar about resilience. But the principle of where I think we need to strip back to is go, no, this is actually about what do we need to do as a holistic approach to create ourselves to be the best versions of who we are, and the best versions of the leaders that we are. And the link, I think, to leadership that's super important is that when people see us as individual leaders, and let's say we're us three are leaders in our fields, when people see us being the best versions of ourselves, what it actually unconsciously does is give them permission to be the best versions of themselves. So you will look at people from an aspirational perspective and compare without intentionally doing so. But when people are actually being deeply true to who they are and what they're all about and what's truly important to them, that is when leaders will be the best leaders that they can be without having to do more traditional style of leadership development, of how do you have difficult conversations, and the kind of stuff that you can have in more traditional approaches to leadership development. That's why I say a lot of what I do is serious development for leaders. It's not so much leadership development, but it's serious development for leaders to help them to influence people in a more powerful way.
Absolutely.
But it has to be true to you.
So, personal question for you, Jeremy. Given the space you're in, given the history you've had, your understanding, you now track your vitality daily. You're experimenting with different ways to feed your body. What do you do on a regular basis to maintain your vitality, your health, your wellness, and do the role modeling for the leaders and the people you coach? How do you take care of yourself regularly?
So coming back to the elite performance approach, I'm quite rigorous with my scheduling because I lead life. I don't use the word busy. I have an intentionally high level of planned activity is what I do. So I'm not busy, and I never see myself as busy. And if I ever feel like I'm actually getting to a point where I'm trying to do too much, then I am not taking myself out to a place of burnout again, and I'm very quick to recognize that.
Good.
So I make sure that I backpedal and really look at how I structure my business, and I have a business manager who supports me doing a whole bunch of the stuff that well, she's way better at than me, and doesn't take my time and my energy. So I'm really intentional about how I use my energy on a daily basis, and really intentional about how I use my time. Much to my wife's disagreement, sometimes I'm a very early riser. So I'm typically up at 5 o'clock in the morning, especially in Perth and WA in the summertime. It's just amazing at 5 a.m. Right next to me on the couch that you can't sit, well, on the chair next to me, I've got a little dog that sits here that I take running every morning. So he gets his exercise, I get my exercise. So what it means is before I look at what else I'm doing during the day, I've already achieved, 1, 2, or 3 of my goals that I want to achieve for myself. So I do that before the day kind of starts and before everyone else is out of bed. So what that allows me to be able to do is I can spend the rest of my day in service of other people, because the kind of industry that we work in is very, we're in service industry. We don't spend our time when we're mentoring thinking about us. It's got nothing to do with us. So before we do that work, we've got to have done our stuff, so we don't have to think about that. And that's an intentional thing. So in terms of actual activities, I run, I swim, I ride. I try to do yoga, but I'm not as rigorous with that. I want to, and haven't yet got into a really powerful routine of meditation, which I want to do, and I'm looking to improve at. That's one of my 2020 goals, is to literally spend 10 minutes doing that kind of thing, just from a mental clarity perspective. So I think a lot of it is, the thing I love about this kind of work that we do is a lot of it is not rocket science. A lot of it is the basic principles of the things that we know deep down are really good for us. But what we've done is we've just made a very conscious decision to prioritize those choices ahead of other things. So you could almost say I'm selfish in terms of what I do on a daily basis, but I believe we need to get over that, because I think we need to be, to give ourselves the things that we need so we can be the best person that we can. So then I'm a better leader, I'm a better dad, I'm a better husband, I'm a better mentor, I'm a better trainer, all of those kind of things. But it's an intentional choice to do it. Yeah.
I think,
and when I don't, I really notice it as well. So
I think that, that there's a really important message in there, Jeremy, which is that It might feel a bit selfish, but selfish is good in this perspective, because what you're doing then is you're really saying, I'm putting myself first, because by putting my own wellness, and I'm using wellness in the fullest sense of the word, emotional, mental, physical, by putting my wellness first, by doing the things that I need for me first, you know, so whether that's first thing in the morning as you do, but they're my priority, I can then be the best version of myself, and I can then give of myself to other people. And that really means that's the best gift that you can give. So whether it's your family, it's the best gift you can give your family is to be the best husband, the best father. The best thing you can give to your team is to be absolutely present and focused on them. And I think that it's such an important concept to prioritize yourself and your own wellness before you start addressing other people's. And if people just did that, if that was the one thing that they did this year, I think that would be an amazing start to the new decade.
Yeah, huge start. Because I think, so I look at in a lot of the work that I do is about the key first principle to me is about self-leadership. It has to be about making a conscious choice to lead as the best version of yourself. So I'll send you guys down the models that you can send off to all of your to all of the listeners and stuff as well.
Thank you.
Because there's this better self wheel, which is so super important, and we've spoken about some of the elements of that, and then that links into the better leadership wheel, which actually is the premise that if you think of a bicycle, so if you just imagine a bike and you've got the better self wheel is actually like the front wheel, which is the steering wheel, which kind of starts taking you in the direction that you want to go. And from a leadership point of view, the better leadership wheel is actually the back wheel, is where the power comes from. But the problem is if you're not steering in the right direction and you haven't got your better self wheel nailed first, what you will tend to do as a leader is you will start to put your things on other people. So your unintentional, unconscious process will be to actually put your stuff on other people in terms of what it is that you think that you need to do, as opposed to how do we need to lead as the best versions of ourselves for the whole team. So that goes into deeper things like purpose and presence and perspective and connection and confidence and congruence and all that kind of stuff. So I love this kind of way of saying, if we have those two wheels that are really well tuned and working really well, and you choose to prioritize just on those 12 things, there's 12 months of the year, there's 12 elements to the two models that I talk about, I could absolutely guarantee that 2020 will be the best year you've ever had.
Great analogy. Love that.
and a fascinating chat, but I am going to draw us to a close because we could
keep going.
We could talk for hours on this. We could take any number of the concepts you've shared, and we could go into great detail. So we are going to bring it to a close. Jerry, thank you. Thank you so much for, first of all, being open and honest and sharing your own personal journey. It's been so exciting to get to know you and understand the origins of your journey right the way through, and sharing some of the invaluable tools and insights into what you do and how you help your clients. And we hope that our listeners can just take one or two of those gems. And if it helps them in their wellness journey, it's been a big success.
It sure has. So thanks again, Jeremy.
My pleasure. It's been an absolute privilege. So always great to talk to you guys, and awesome work on your 20-day challenge. I will keep going in and start recording some of the stuff as soon as I get off now.
Sounds good.
All right, Jeremy, you take care. We'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks a lot. See you soon, guys.
Bye. Cheers.